She was the most powerful woman in the building. He was just trying to get his brother home safely. Neither of them expected that one Friday night outside a nightclub would rewrite both of their lives completely. What happens when the man who accidentally witnessed your most humiliating moment walks into your boardroom on Monday morning, and you're the one holding his career in your hands? This is the story of Logan Pierce and Sienna Vaughn, and it starts exactly where neither of them wanted it to. If this story pulls you in, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Friday night was cold in the particular way that late October gets in the city. Not brutal yet, just sharp enough to remind you that warmth was something you had to earn. Logan Pierce stood on the sidewalk outside Marquee, one of those nightclubs where the velvet rope wasn't decorative, and checked his phone for the 14th time. His brother had texted 40 minutes ago. "Out in 5, bro, I promise." That had been followed by 3 more texts of diminishing reliability, the last of which simply read, coming with no punctuation, which Logan had learned years ago was Tyler's way of saying he needed at least another 20 minutes. Logan was 32 years old. He had work in 9 hours. He had a daughter at home with a babysitter who charged by the hour, and he was standing on a sidewalk outside a club he hadn't been inside since he was 24, wearing a jacket that wasn't quite warm enough, watching drunk strangers negotiate with a bouncer who looked like he'd heard every story twice. He shouldn't have answered Tyler's call. He knew that. But Tyler was 25 and still making the kinds of decisions that required a designated driver and an older brother willing to lose sleep over them. And Logan had never quite figured out how to say no when it actually mattered. He leaned against the brick wall beside the club's side entrance and scrolled through work emails he'd already read, mostly to give himself something to do that wasn't just standing there looking like a man waiting for his life to start again. That was when the side door opened. It wasn't the main entrance. The main entrance faced the street and had the rope and the lights and the small crowd of people either going in or being turned away. This was the service entrance, the door staff used when they needed to move someone out quietly, or when vendors came through, or when the kind of people who didn't want to be seen leaving wanted to leave without being seen. Logan was standing maybe 6 feet from it when it opened. He didn't look up immediately. He heard the door swing wide and assumed it was a staff member. Then he heard a sound, not a word, more like a sharp intake of breath, the kind people make when something goes wrong so fast they don't have time to process it. And he did look up, because the sound was distinct enough to pull his attention away from his phone. The woman who came through the door was moving quickly, one hand pressed flat against the brick wall to catch her balance, and there was no diplomatic way to think about this, in a state of significant wardrobe malfunction. The back seam of her dress had given way, a clean split running from just below her shoulder blades down nearly to her waist, and the fabric had pulled apart enough that Logan looked away, immediately and completely. He turned his head back toward the street and stared at a parked car across the road as though it were the most interesting vehicle he'd ever seen. He heard her stop moving, heard the small, controlled silence of a person who had just realized they were not alone. "Don't," she said. Her voice was low and flat, not panicked, just precise, the way someone speaks when they are exerting absolute control over a situation that has just become deeply uncontrolled. "I'm not looking," Logan said, still facing the street. Another silence. He heard fabric shifting, the sound of someone trying to assess damage. "How much did you see?" "Nothing." "That's not an answer," Logan exhaled. "I looked up when I heard the door. I looked away immediately. I saw, I don't know, a second, less." He paused. "I'm going to keep looking at that car until you tell me otherwise." The car he was looking at was a black sedan with a parking ticket on the windshield. He stared at the parking ticket with profound concentration. "Give me your jacket." He almost turned around on reflex, caught himself. "What?" "Your jacket. Take it off and hand it back without turning around. I need something to cover this until I can get to my car." Logan shrugged off his jacket without thinking. He held it out behind him and felt her take it from his hand. Her fingers brushed his knuckles for half a second. Her hands were cold. "Okay," she said, after a moment. He turned around. He recognized her in the way that you recognize someone when the context is so completely wrong that recognition takes a beat longer than it should. She was standing with his jacket held across her back, wearing it like a cape. her posture so straight and controlled it looked almost aggressive. Her hair had come loose from whatever it had been pinned into, and there was a smear of something, a drink maybe, along the side of her left wrist. But he recognized her, because her face was in the lobby of his office building, in a framed photograph beside the mission statement and the company values and the little placard that said Sienna Vaughn, Chief Executive Officer, his CEO. He said nothing. The recognition must have shown on his face because something shifted in hers. A very small, very controlled tightening around the eyes that wasn't quite embarrassment and wasn't quite anger but was somewhere in the territory of both. "You work at Meridian," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "What department?" "Creative. Senior copywriter." She looked at him for a moment in a way that felt less like seeing him and more like cataloging him, filing the information away with the kind of efficiency that probably ran through everything she did. "Logan Pierce," he said, because it felt wrong not to offer it. "I know who you are," she said. Then, apparently because that came out more sharply than she intended, she added, "I reviewed the Harlow campaign. Your team's pitch was the strongest." "Thank you." That wasn't a compliment. It was a data point. They stood on the sidewalk looking at each other in the particular discomfort of two people who have just shared something deeply human and have no shared language for it. "My car is at the end of the block," she said. "You can have your jacket back Monday." "You don't have to." "Monday," she said, and walked away with his jacket across her shoulders like it was intentional, like this had all been planned, like Sienna Vaughn didn't do anything by accident, even the things that were entirely accidents. Logan watched her go. Then he put his hands in his pockets, which were now extremely cold, and turned back to staring at the parking ticket on the black sedan. Tyler came out the main entrance 11 minutes later, slightly unsteady and smelling like expensive whiskey. He clapped Logan on the shoulder with the cheerful oblivion of someone who had missed everything. "Thanks for coming, man. You're the best." "Yeah," Logan said. "I know." He drove his brother home and said very little. Tyler fell asleep in the passenger seat somewhere around the third traffic light and snored softly the rest of the way. Logan drove with both hands on the wheel and thought about the photograph in the lobby and the way Sienna Vaughn had said, "I know who you are," and whether there was any version of Monday morning that didn't end with him clearing out his desk. He decided probably not, but he showed up anyway, because that was what he did. Logan Pierce had learned a long time ago that showing up was the only real advantage most people had. You didn't have to be the smartest person in the room. You didn't have to have the best ideas every time, or the most confidence, or the right connections. You just had to be there, consistently, when it mattered. Show up when it was inconvenient. Show up when you were tired. Show up when everything in you wanted to stay in bed and let the day happen to someone else. He'd learned that partly from his father, who had worked 30 years in manufacturing and never once called in sick, and partly from the years following his divorce, when showing up had been the only thing standing between his daughter and the kind of childhood neither of them deserved. Mia was 8 now. She had her mother's dark hair and her own stubborn, particular personality, and she had been 4 years old when her mother, Renata, had sat across from Logan at their kitchen table and said, in a voice that was more tired than angry, "I don't think I want this anymore." She had meant the marriage. She had also, it became clear over the following weeks, meant the life, the apartment, the city, the version of herself she had become inside it. Renata was in Portland now. She had a ceramic studio and a partner named Will, and as far as Logan could tell, a version of contentment that had never been available to her inside their marriage. She called Mia every Sunday. She came to visit twice a year. She was, in the specific and limited way that was possible given the geography and the history, a decent mother. She was just not a present one. Logan didn't resent her for it anymore. He had, for a while. The resentment had been enormous and exhausting and had eventually burned itself out the way intense things do, leaving behind something smaller and more manageable. What was left wasn't forgiveness exactly, more like acceptance of the fact that people were who they were, and you could spend your life being angry about it, or you could just get on with things. He had gotten on with things. He had a 2-bedroom apartment in Riverdale, 12 minutes from Mia's school. He had a babysitter named June, who was 63 and reliably unflappable, and charged $17 an hour, which was worth every cent. He had a job at Meridian Creative Group that he was genuinely good at, a modest reputation in the industry, and a collection of half-finished home improvement projects that he got to whenever Mia was at school, and the weekend stretched out in a way that felt, briefly, like having time. He was not unhappy. He wanted to be clear about that, at least to himself. He was 32 and tired, and the romantic part of his life had been mostly dormant since the divorce. Not because he decided to be alone, but because there was never quite enough room in the schedule for it. And after a while, you stopped noticing the absence in the same acute way. It just became the shape of things. He dropped Mia at school on Monday morning, and she made him promise, for the third time, that he'd be at her science fair on Thursday. He promised. She gave him a look that suggested she was taking the promise seriously and would hold him to it with the same reliable follow-through she applied to everything. He kissed the top of her head and watched her walk through the school doors and then drove to the office with his hands tighter on the steering wheel than they needed to be. He had told himself on the drive home Friday night that the encounter with Sienna Vaughn was probably nothing. CEOs had better things to think about than embarrassing moments outside nightclubs. She was running a $40 million company. She had campaigns to approve and clients to manage, and a board of directors who were, judging by the office gossip he occasionally absorbed without trying, not entirely easy to deal with. She wasn't lying awake thinking about some copywriter who'd seen her for 3 seconds on a sidewalk. He had been mostly convincing himself right up until Sunday night, when the anxiety had settled back in and he'd spent 2 hours rereading old performance reviews as though they were going to tell him something useful. The jacket was on his desk when he arrived, not draped over it or left casually, folded, precisely, with the collar aligned and the sleeves flat, the way you fold something when you want to demonstrate that you are a person who does not do things carelessly. There was a small folded note on top, written in handwriting that was aggressive and angular and somehow unsurprising. Pierce, my assistant will reach out this morning regarding a project reassignment. SV. He read it twice. Then he sat down, turned on his computer, and spent 15 minutes staring at his screensaver while his coworker Dennis went on at length about a parking situation in the garage. You okay? Dennis asked eventually. You look like you didn't sleep. I slept fine, Logan said. You look like you didn't. Dennis, I'm just saying. The email from Sienna's assistant arrived at 9:47. It was brief and gave nothing away, requesting Logan's presence in the executive conference room at 11 o'clock for a project briefing. His direct supervisor, a man named Carl, who managed the creative floor with the energy of someone who had been moderately disappointed by everything for the past decade, received a copy and appeared at Logan's desk within minutes. You want to tell me why you're being summoned to the 42nd floor? Carl asked. No idea, Logan said, which was technically true in the sense that he had no official information, and technically false in every other sense. Carl looked at him with the expression of a man deciding whether to push it. He decided against. Just don't promise anything without running it by me first, he said, and went back to his office. Logan pressed his palms flat on his desk and breathed through it. The 42nd floor was different from the floors below it in the way that certain spaces are different. Not just physically, but atmospherically. The air pressure of importance slightly elevated, everything a degree quieter and more deliberate. The executive conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city and a table long enough to park a car on, and it smelled like good coffee and the particular brand of tension that money generates. Sienna Vaughn was already there when Logan arrived. She was standing at the window with her back to the door, a tablet in one hand, and she was wearing a slate gray blazer over black trousers and looked like she had spent the weekend resting and reviewing quarterly projections rather than whatever she had actually been doing on Friday night. She turned when he came in. Close the door, she said. He closed it. Sit down. He sat. She came to the head of the table and set her tablet down but didn't sit. She looked at him for a moment with that same cataloging quality he'd noticed on Friday. Direct and assessing, and without any of the social lubrication that most people use to soften the experience of being assessed. I'm not going to address Friday, she said. It happened. You handled it with discretion. That's the end of it. Understood, Logan said. I'm addressing it right now so that we don't have to address it ever again. Are we clear? Completely. She nodded once, apparently satisfied, and picked up her tablet. Meridian is pitching for the Holloway Group account next quarter. It's the largest single contract this company has pursued in its history. We're talking about a 3-year creative retainer that would restructure our revenue model entirely. I've been reviewing internal talent for the past 6 weeks, and I want you to co-lead the pitch team. Logan sat very still. The other co-lead is Maya Chen from Brand Strategy. You'll have a team of 8. You'll report directly to me for the duration of the project. Can I ask? He stopped. Started again. Why me specifically? Sienna set the tablet down and looked at him. Because I read the Harlow campaign when it landed on my desk, and the conceptual framework was the strongest work we've produced in 18 months. I asked who wrote it. Your name came up. Then I pulled your file. She paused. You've been underutilized. Carl might have a different perspective on that. Carl's perspective on talent allocation is not the primary factor in my decision-making. Something shifted slightly in her expression. Not quite a smile, more like the acknowledgement that something had been slightly funny. This is a significant opportunity. It also means long hours, high pressure, and considerable internal visibility. If the pitch fails, that visibility is not comfortable. I know what pitches are. I know you do. I'm making sure we're clear about the stakes. She picked the tablet back up. You'll receive the project brief this afternoon. First team meeting is Wednesday at 8. Any questions? There were approximately 35 questions, most of which Logan was smart enough not to ask. No, he said. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. She looked back down at her tablet, which was apparently a dismissal. Logan stood, pushed his chair back in because something about the room demanded it, and walked to the door. Pierce, he turned. You still have the note, she said. There's nothing sensitive on it, but get rid of it. He pulled it from his jacket pocket and set it on the table beside the door. She didn't look up again. He left. In the elevator, going down, he put both hands against the wall and breathed very carefully, the way you do when something has happened that you haven't processed yet, but that your body has already registered as significant. He was not fired. He was, apparently, the opposite of fired. He didn't know what to do with that yet, but he was going to figure it out. The project brief arrived at 3:15 and Logan read it twice in the supply room, standing up, away from Dennis and the rest of the creative floor, because he needed the 5 minutes to let the scale of it land properly. The Holloway Group was a real estate and hospitality conglomerate with properties across 14 states. They had been working with the same agency for 11 years, and that relationship had recently collapsed in a way that industry people were describing as messy. They were looking for a new creative partner, and they were, the brief made this clear, looking for something that didn't feel like what they'd had before. They wanted something with genuine vision, not polished competence. The budget figure was at the bottom of the brief. Logan read it again, put the papers face down on the supply room counter for a moment while he recalibrated. Maya Chen found him in the hallway afterward, which was how he learned that Maya Chen moved with the decisive efficiency of someone who had been waiting for this opportunity longer than she'd been waiting for anything else. You're Pierce, she said. She was 35, compact, with the kind of focused energy that suggested she slept maybe 5 hours a night and considered it adequate. Logan, he said, I know, I pulled your work this morning. She said it as a fact, no preamble. The Harlow campaign. The brand positioning was sharp, but you buried the lead. The emotional core of the pitch was in paragraph 4. It should have been paragraph 1. I had a creative director at the time who, I'm not criticizing. I'm telling you what I noticed. She tilted her head slightly. You rewrote the Meridian brand values document 2 years ago. I found your draft in the archive. Someone watered it down before it went to print. A few people had notes. The original was better. She said it matter-of-factly, the way you say the sky is blue. We have different skill sets. I can read a room and build a strategic framework faster than most people alive. You can find the human angle in things in a way that doesn't feel manufactured. We need both for Holloway. She stuck out her hand. So, partners. Logan shook it. Partners. Don't be late Wednesday. I start on time. I'm always on time. Everyone thinks that about themselves, she said, and was already walking away. He picked Mia up from the after-school program at 5:30, and she talked for most of the drive home about her science fair project, which involved growing bean sprouts under different colored lights, and had apparently generated significant controversy among her classmates about methodology. Jalen said my hypothesis was wrong before I even finished explaining it, she said, with the particular tone of someone who had cataloged this injustice carefully and was presenting it for the record. What was your hypothesis? That red light makes them grow faster. Jalen said it doesn't matter what color the light is, it just matters how much of it there is. What does the research say? Mia was quiet for a moment, which meant she'd already looked into it and didn't love the answer. Jalen is kind of partially right, she said finally, but I think he's not completely right. Did you tell him that? I told him he was oversimplifying. Logan glanced over at her in the passenger seat, 8 years old with her seatbelt on and her backpack in her lap, and her jaw set, with the particular stubbornness that she'd come by honestly. Good, he said. He didn't like it. He'll survive. She considered this. Are you okay? You've been quiet. Just thinking about work. Good thinking or bad thinking? He pulled into the parking lot of their apartment building. I'm not sure yet, he said honestly. Somewhere in between. Mia nodded like this was an acceptable answer. She grabbed her backpack. June made pasta before she left. There's enough for both of us. Perfect. You should probably eat a lot, she said, climbing out. You look tired. Everyone keeps saying that today. Because you look tired, she said reasonably, and went to unlock the building door. He sat in the car for a moment after she went in. The parking lot was quiet. The sky had gone the particular dark blue of early evening in late October. He thought about Sienna Vaughn standing at the conference room window. He thought about the way she'd said you've been underutilized, not as a compliment, just as an observation, a correction of a data point that had been incorrectly entered somewhere. He thought about the folded jacket and the note and the fact that she had remembered his name. Then he went inside and ate pasta with his daughter and listened to the full extended account of Jalen's methodological overconfidence, and the work stuff stayed in the parking lot where he'd left it. For now. Wednesday arrived faster than it had any right to. Logan was in the conference room at 7:52, which turned out to be exactly 2 minutes before Maya and 4 minutes before the rest of the team, and Maya acknowledged this with a small nod that he understood to mean she had noted the arrival time and filed it appropriately. Sienna came in at 8:01. She had coffee and a folder and the look of someone who had already been working for 2 hours. She introduced herself to the team, which was slightly formal given that everyone in the room had seen her face in the lobby for however many years they'd worked there, and then immediately dropped the formality and started talking about Holloway like she'd been thinking about nothing else for a week. She probably had been. Their previous agency gave them the same campaign skeleton 3 times in a row, she said, pulling up a slide that showed the progression. Different executions, same bones. New project, same emotional logic. They got comfortable and stopped asking whether the client still needed the thing they were selling. She looked around the table. We are not going to do that. Our pitch is going to treat Holloway like they've never existed before, because as far as our creative department is concerned, they haven't. She had a way of running a meeting that was almost austere in its efficiency. No wasted motion, no social padding, no extended discussion about things that had already been decided. She asked targeted questions and actually listened to the answers, which Logan had noticed was rarer in leadership than it should have been. When someone gave a weak response, she didn't embarrass them, but she also didn't pretend the response was stronger than it was. She just moved on, or redirected, or asked the question differently. Logan found himself watching her more than he'd expected to. Not in any way he'd have been comfortable explaining, just observing. The way you observe someone who is good at something and who doesn't seem to need your recognition of that fact. She caught him watching once. He looked down at his notes. He was fairly sure she'd filed that away too. The meeting ran 90 minutes and ended with clear assignments and a project timeline that was aggressive, but Maya confirmed afterward, achievable. Logan had 3 deliverables by Friday. He stayed late that night and got 2 of them done. He was in the parking garage at 8:45 when his phone rang. It was June. Nothing serious, she said immediately, which was the preamble June always used for things that were somewhat serious. Mia's got a fever, 101. She's been asleep for an hour, but she asked for you when she woke up. He was already at his car. I'm on my way. Mia was awake and flushed when he got home, sitting up in bed with the particular mournful dignity of a sick child who is not quite sick enough to be unconscious, but definitely too sick to feel fine. Logan sat on the edge of her bed and felt her forehead with the back of his hand, which told him roughly nothing specific, but was the thing you did. My head hurts, she said. I know. I probably can't go to school tomorrow. Probably not. She leaned against his arm. She smelled like children's fever, that particular mix of warmth and sleep. You smell like a meeting, she said. Is that a bad smell? It's a boring smell. He laughed, which surprised him. Fair enough. Will you have to miss work tomorrow? I'll figure it out. She was quiet for a moment, then, is it important work? He looked down at her. You're more important, he said, and meant it exactly without decoration. I know, she said, in the way she said things she'd already decided were true. But I mean, is it okay if it's important? The work? Something in the question caught him off guard. Yeah, he said, it is kind of important. Good, she said. You should have important work. He sat with her until she fell asleep, which took about 12 minutes. Then he went to the kitchen, made coffee he didn't entirely need, and sent Maya a message explaining the situation and asking if Friday deadlines could hold. Maya responded in 4 minutes. Take care of your kid. Friday still works. Let me know if you need anything shifted. Then, after a pause, another message. FYI, Vaughn runs a flexible desk policy for family situations. You can log this through HR. She won't penalize you. Logan read it twice. Then he made a note to himself and went back to check on Mia. He sat in the chair by her bed for a while in the dark. The apartment was quiet. The heater clicked in the way it always clicked. Mia breathed steadily. He thought about the Holloway pitch. He thought about Maya's message and the particular information embedded in it. Not just that Sienna had a policy, but that Maya had wanted him to know about it. He thought about standing on a sidewalk in the cold at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, and whether any of this would have happened without that moment of pure absurd chance. He wasn't sure whether that was a comforting thought or a terrifying one. He decided it was probably both, and that was okay. He closed his eyes in the chair and slept, just for a little while until Mia stirred at 2 a.m. and asked for water. Mia's fever broke by Thursday morning, which meant she was well enough to go back to school, and Logan was well enough to stop running on 4 hours of sleep and guilt. He dropped her off, watched her walk through the doors with her backpack and her particular no-nonsense stride, and drove to the office feeling like a man who had survived something minor but real. The Holloway project had not waited for him to catch up. Maya had covered 2 of his deliverables without being asked and left the files on the shared drive with a note that said, "Only check my logic on the demographic segmentation. I may have overcorrected." He checked her logic. She hadn't overcorrected. He sent her a message saying so, and she responded with a single thumbs up, which he was starting to understand was Maya's version of warmth. The first full team review was scheduled for Friday afternoon. Logan spent Thursday rebuilding his contribution from scratch because he'd read Maya's framework and realized his original approach had been thinking too small. He'd been writing for the audience Holloway had always targeted, not the audience they were trying to reach. He stayed until 7 rewriting the conceptual positioning, then went home, cooked dinner, helped Mia finish a worksheet on fractions that was harder than he remembered fractions being, and was in bed by 10:30. He was not expecting Sienna Vaughn to be in the building at 7 the next morning when he arrived, but she was at the coffee station on the 42nd floor. He'd come up to drop something on Maya's desk, and she was in a different kind of mode than he'd seen her in meetings. The blazer was on. The posture was the same, but she was alone, and there was no audience, and she was staring at her phone with the fixed concentration of someone who was reading something they didn't want to be reading. She looked up when he came in. "Pierce?" "Sorry, I was just dropping something for Maya. I'll come back." "It's fine." She set her phone face down. "Get your coffee." He got his coffee. The kitchen was small enough that there was no way to do this without being approximately 4 feet from her, which was closer than their usual boardroom distance, and felt it. She poured a second cup for herself and leaned against the counter. The city was visible through the window behind her, gray and early and indifferent. "How's your daughter?" she asked. He looked over. She was looking at her coffee cup, not at him, in the way of someone who asks a question and then doesn't want to appear to be waiting for the answer. "Better," he said. "Back at school yesterday." "Good." A pause. "Fevers in kids they're hard, even when they're not serious." "Yeah." He didn't ask how she knew. The comment had the quality of something said from personal proximity, not theory, but it wasn't the kind of thing you pressed on with someone you'd known for 2 weeks. She picked up her phone again, then put it down again. It was a small gesture, but it was the first time he'd seen her do anything twice. "The board meeting got moved to next Thursday," she said, "which means the timeline for Holloway's initial pitch framework needs to move up. I need the conceptual layer completed by end of next week, not the week after." "That's tight." "I know it's tight." "Maya's going to have thoughts about that." "I know she is." The corner of her mouth moved just slightly. "That's why I'm telling you first." He almost laughed, caught it just in time. "That's not fair to either of us." "No, it's not," she agreed and picked up her coffee. "Tell her before the 10 o'clock check-in. Give her time to be furious before she has to be professional." He carried that conversation back down to his floor and replayed it 3 times before the morning meeting, because there was something different about it that he couldn't immediately name. She had been, not soft exactly, because Sienna Vaughn in soft mode was probably still sharper than most people at their most alert, but unguarded. Briefly, by degrees, the way a door opens an inch before someone decides whether to open it further or pull it closed again. He filed it away and went to find Maya. Maya's reaction to the new timeline was exactly what he'd predicted, delivered in a low, controlled voice that suggested she was capable of being considerably louder and was choosing not to be. "She can't just move the board meeting and expect the work to compress proportionally," Maya said. "Creative development doesn't scale like that. You lose quality. You lose precision." "I know." "Does she know?" "I think she knows, and she's asking anyway." Maya looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Fine," she said. "We cut the secondary consumer profile work and focused the entire positioning argument on the Holloway core demographic. It's actually cleaner. But we're going to need more hours this week." "I figured. Do you have coverage for your daughter?" The question was direct in the way Maya did everything. No softening. Logan appreciated it more than the alternative. "I'll make it work," he said. "That's not what I asked." "June's flexible," he said. "And Tyler owes me several favors." Maya nodded once. "Okay, 8 o'clock tomorrow. Tell the team." The week that followed was the kind of week that compressed time. Days that felt both endless and somehow already over. The hours between 8 and midnight running together in a blur of drafts and feedback sessions and coffee that was never quite hot enough when you got to it. Logan moved between his apartment and the office like a man navigating 2 separate planets with incompatible atmospheres, trying to be fully present in both, and mostly succeeding in neither. Tyler came through, showing up Tuesday evening with takeout and a willingness to sit on the couch with Mia and watch competitive cooking shows that Logan didn't have the bandwidth to appreciate. Mia liked Tyler in the specific way she liked people who didn't talk down to her, and Tyler, for all his 25-year-old unreliability, had always treated his niece like a person worth taking seriously. "Your brother's funny," Mia told Logan on Wednesday morning. "Sometimes. He told me about a girl he likes. He tells everyone about girls he likes." "I gave him advice," she said, in a tone that suggested she felt the advice had been solid. Logan looked over at her. "What advice?" "I told him to just say the actual thing he means instead of being weird about it." He couldn't immediately argue with that. "Good advice," he said. She shrugged. "It's obvious." He thought about that on the drive to the office. Just say the actual thing you mean. The confidence of 8 years old when the right answer still felt like it had a clear shape. The working dynamic between Logan and Sienna developed in the way that working dynamics do when the project is big enough and the hours long enough, gradually and then suddenly, like something that had been building underground and finally broke the surface. They developed a shorthand. She stopped explaining context he already had. He stopped hedging his opinions before he gave them. She pushed back hard. That was the thing that surprised him most. Not the pushing back itself, but the quality of it. She didn't dismiss ideas. She interrogated them, picked at the foundations, applied pressure to the points that hadn't been fully thought through. It was uncomfortable in the specific way that useful things often are. His ideas came back from her sharper and leaner, and occasionally with the recognition that something he thought was good was actually just comfortable. "You keep anchoring the emotional story to the product," she told him one evening. The two of them and Maya in the conference room with the city going dark outside and the table covered in printed drafts. Holloway doesn't want people to buy their properties. They want people to feel like their properties are the place where real life happens. Those are different things. "That's a fine line," Logan said. "All good creative is a fine line." She picked up one of his drafts. "This section. This is close. The language here, the where ordinary days become the ones you keep, that's the line. But you buried it. It's on page 3. "I was building to it. The audience isn't going to page 3 unless you give them a reason on page 1. She set it down. "You know this. You're doing the thing where you're protecting the idea instead of trusting it." He looked at her. "How do you know I do that?" "Because you've done it in every draft." She said it without cruelty, just observation. The best version of the idea is in there. You just keep putting other things in front of it. He was quiet for a moment. Maya across the table was very deliberately reviewing a different document. "I'll rewrite the opening," Logan said. "I know you will." She picked up her coffee. "That's why I said it." The thing about criticism delivered without performance was that it landed differently. It didn't come with an audience or a point to prove. It was just information, offered plainly, and Logan found that he could hear it in a way he hadn't always been able to hear it from people who wanted something from the interaction. He stayed another hour after Maya left, rewrote the opening 3 times, and left a revised draft on the shared drive at 11:40. Sienna's response came at 12:15. "Better. The third version. SV." He read it in his car in the parking garage. He sat there for a minute longer than he needed to, just because it had been a long day, and he wanted one more minute before it was over. Mom. He had not been thinking about her. He wanted to be precise about that, not dishonest. He'd noticed things. The way she held her coffee mug with both hands in the early morning, the fact that she apologized when she was wrong in a way that was quick and complete and didn't linger on itself, the way she sometimes looked out the conference room window with an expression that didn't have a professional name. He'd noticed these things the way you notice details about anyone you spend significant hours with, but he had not been thinking about her in the way that eventually, and inevitably, becomes a problem. The thinking started in the 3rd week. It started because of Mia. He'd brought Mia to the office on a Saturday, a decision born of necessity rather than plan, because the Holloway brief had required a weekend session and June was unavailable and Tyler had a prior commitment that Logan hadn't pushed on. He'd set Mia up in a small conference room with her tablet and headphones and a selection of snacks and felt only mildly guilty about it. Sienna came in on Saturdays. He'd learned this by accident. She came in for a few hours and then left, and she rarely told anyone she was doing it, as though the habit were something she'd rather not explain. She came by the small conference room at 11 and stopped in the doorway. Mia had her headphones on and was drawing something in a notebook with the total absorption of a child who has decided this is the only thing happening in the world. Sienna stood in the doorway for a moment, and her face did something that Logan, watching from across the hallway, couldn't fully categorize. It wasn't soft, exactly. It was more like recognition, brief and unguarded, and gone, before she fully allowed it to settle. Then Mia looked up, noticed her, and pulled one headphone off. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Sienna said. "I'm not supposed to bother anyone. My dad works here." "I know, I work here too." Mia considered this with the evaluative seriousness she applied to most situations. "Do you work for my dad?" Something flashed across Sienna's face. "Not exactly." "He works for you?" "In a way." "Okay." Mia looked at her notebook. "Do you want to see what I'm drawing?" Logan held his breath from across the hallway, unreasonably. Sienna walked into the room and looked at the notebook. Logan couldn't see what Mia was drawing from where he stood. He watched Sienna's face instead. "This is good," Sienna said. "What is it?" It's our apartment, with the tree outside. I'm trying to draw the tree, but trees are hard. They are hard, Sienna agreed. She crouched down to see it better, which meant she was now at Mia's eye level, which was a thing Logan would not have predicted. The trick with trees is you stop trying to draw every leaf and just draw the shape of the whole thing instead. Your eye fills in the rest. Mia stared at her. Then she looked at the notebook. Then she erased something and tried again. Better? Sienna asked. Kind of, Mia said. I might need more practice. Most things take more practice. That's what my dad always says. Your dad is right about that one. Sienna stood and found Logan standing in the hallway doorway. She didn't appear startled, but something about the fact that he'd been watching registered in her expression. She's not bothering anyone, Logan said. I checked. She wasn't bothering me. A pause that had some weight in it. She's perceptive. Yeah, he said. She is. She walked past him to the main conference room without further comment, and Logan went back to his work, and neither of them said anything else about it for the rest of the day. But he thought about it. The way she'd crouched down, the way she'd talked to Mia like a person. No adjustment in tone, no performance of warmth, just direct and present and real. He thought about what Maya had told him in passing one afternoon, about Sienna having grown up largely in her grandparents' house while her parents worked overseas, moving 3 times before high school, building the kind of self-sufficiency that looks like coldness from the outside because it's genuinely hard to reach. He wasn't trying to explain her to himself. He was just noticing that the picture had more pieces than he'd initially been given. Well, 2 weeks before the pitch, Mia fractured her arm. It was a Thursday, which was already a bad day because the board feedback had been mixed and there were revisions due, and the creative team had been in back-to-back sessions since 8 in the morning. Logan got the call from the school nurse at 1:15. Mia had fallen on the playground, a bad landing from a climbing structure, and the preliminary assessment suggested it wasn't serious but needed imaging. He was out of the building in 4 minutes. He texted Maya from the car. Then, because there was a 2 o'clock with Sienna that was now not happening, and because it felt unprofessional to just not appear, he sent a brief message to her assistant explaining the situation. He was in the hospital waiting room at 2:17 when his phone showed a call from Sienna's direct line. He stared at it for a second, then answered. Is she okay? Sienna said. Straight in, no preamble. We're waiting on the x-ray. It's her left arm. She landed wrong. He heard himself and registered that he sounded fairly calm, which was a performance because he'd spent the drive over cataloging every bad outcome and shutting each one down through sheer force of will. Which hospital? Sienna. Which hospital, Logan? He told her. There was a pause on the line. The 2 o'clock is rescheduled, she said. Don't worry about it. Focus on Mia. She came anyway. That was the part he hadn't expected. An hour and 15 minutes after the call, while Mia was getting her arm cast and being remarkably composed about it, in a way that Logan suspected was mostly performance for his benefit, he looked up and Sienna Vaughn was at the entrance to the treatment bay. She had a stuffed dog under one arm. It was small and brown and had a slightly lopsided ear, the kind of thing you buy from a hospital gift shop in a hurry. She held it with the casual grip of someone who has not purchased stuffed animals recently and is not entirely sure of the protocol. Logan opened his mouth and closed it again. Sienna looked at Mia, who looked back at her with the particular combination of pain medication, curiosity, and incapacity for pretending she wasn't interested. Your dad told me you fell, Sienna said. I was trying to reach the top bar, Mia said. I almost made it. Almost is worth something. That's what I said. Mia looked at the stuffed dog with the frank assessment of an 8-year-old evaluating a gift. Is that for me? Sienna set it on the bed beside Mia's good arm. They only had 2 options. The other one was a pelican. Mia picked up the dog. I like dogs. I've been asking my dad for a real one. I'm working on it, Logan said, which was true in the sense that he thought about it sometimes. Mia looked between them with the particular attention of a child who is picking up on a dynamic she doesn't have a name for yet. You work with my dad, she said to Sienna. I do. On the important project? Sienna glanced at Logan. Your dad told you about that? He said it was kind of important. Mia held the stuffed dog against her cast. He didn't say you were involved. He's too modest, Sienna said. I know, Mia agreed immediately, with the conviction of someone who has believed this for years. Logan looked at the ceiling briefly. Sienna stayed for 40 minutes. She sat in the chair beside the bed and answered Mia's questions with the same direct seriousness she brought to everything, and Mia asked a surprising number of questions. And Logan sat in the other chair and watched the two of them and felt something shift, very slowly, like the first movement of something that had been frozen for a long time. It wasn't a feeling he'd been looking for. But it was there. He walked Sienna to the elevator when she left. The corridor was quiet. She pressed the button and they stood beside each other, and the normal conversational scaffolding wasn't available in the same way it was at the office. You didn't have to come, he said. I know. Why did you? She looked at the elevator doors. The pause lasted long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. She's important to you, Sienna said finally. That makes her... It matters. What matters to people you're working closely with ends up mattering. She paused. That probably sounds more calculated than I mean it. It doesn't, he said. The elevator opened. She stepped in. The 2 o'clock is moved to Monday, she said, back in her regular register, the professional distance reestablished like a door being gently closed. Get some rest. He rode the elevator back up. Mia was named the stuffed dog captain, which Logan felt was a strong choice. She ate the orange jello the nurse brought without complaining, which was how he knew she felt at least somewhat okay. I like her, Mia said, when he was helping her get her jacket on one-armed. She's... Yeah, Logan said. She talks to me like I'm a person. Most people talk to you like you're a person. No, Mia said, with the certainty of someone who has thought carefully about this. Most people talk to me like I'm a kid. It's different. Logan couldn't argue with that. He tied his own shoe instead, taking longer than it required because he needed a moment where nobody was looking at his face. Ready? He said. Ready, said Mia, Captain the dog tucked under her good arm. They drove home in the early dark of a November evening, and Logan kept both hands on the wheel and didn't think about anything in particular and thought about everything. The pitch was on a Tuesday in December, and the weather was the kind of cold that gets into the building anyway, the lobby doors letting in brief slaps of wind every time someone came through. Logan arrived at 7:15 with 2 copies of the final deck and the particular stillness of someone who has done everything they can do and is now just waiting to find out if it was enough. Maya was already there. She had a coffee in each hand and gave him one without being asked. How do you feel? She said. Ask me in 4 hours. I'm asking now. He considered it honestly. Like we did the work, he said. Like it's actually good, and like that doesn't guarantee anything. Maya nodded like this was the correct answer. The Holloway CFO is risk-averse. He'll push back on the production budget in the 3rd section. Don't let him reframe it as excess. Reframe it as investment. The numbers support it. I know. And when Sienna opens the floor for questions, Maya. She stopped. I know, he said again, quieter. We've been over it. She looked at him for a moment with the assessing quality she brought to most things. Then she handed him the second coffee anyway. Okay, she said. Let's go. The Holloway team arrived at 9. There were 6 of them, the CFO, 2 senior VPs, a brand director, and 2 others whose specific roles Logan didn't catch in the introductions. They had the guarded, calibrated body language of people who had been through several of these and were professionally skeptical by now, which was fair and which Logan had expected. Sienna opened. She was different in front of a client room than she was internally. Not warmer exactly, but more expansive, like she widened slightly to fill the space. She laid out Meridian's capabilities with the directness that was characteristic of her. No performance of humility, no overselling, just clean confidence that knew what it was worth. Logan watched the Holloway people across the table and saw 2 of them sit slightly straighter in the first 5 minutes. That was a good sign. Then she handed it to Logan and Maya, and Logan stood up, and everything he'd been holding in place for the past 6 weeks either worked or it didn't. It worked. He could feel it in the room. Not immediately, not from the first slide, but building. The opening framework he'd rewritten 3 times at Sienna's direction landed the way she'd said it would land if it was right. The Holloway brand director, who had been writing notes throughout the early section, stopped writing and just listened. The CFO's posture shifted somewhere around the 12-minute mark, from crossed arms to hands flat on the table, which in Logan's experience was the physical language of a person who is no longer looking for reasons to say no. Maya handled the strategy layer with her characteristic precision. Logan handled the creative narrative. They had been doing this long enough now that they moved between sections without visible seams. No fumbling for the handoff, no repeated information. The room stayed with them. The questions at the end were hard in the good way. Engaged, specific, challenging. The CFO did push back on the production budget in the 3rd section, exactly as Maya had predicted, and Logan reframed it as investment without hesitating, with the numbers ready before the question was fully finished. The CFO sat back. Didn't concede out loud, but didn't push further. They were out of the room at 12:40. In the hallway, waiting for the elevator, Maya exhaled. "That was it," she said. "Not a question." "We'll see," Logan said, because he'd learned not to land on certainty before the landing was confirmed. "I've been in a lot of pitch rooms," Maya said. That was it. Sienna said nothing until they were in the elevator with the doors closed. Then she looked at Logan and said, "The opening. Exactly right." "I had good notes," he said. "You had good instincts. The notes just cleared the way." She looked forward at the elevator doors. "Well done." He didn't know what to do with the warmth of that, so he looked at the elevator panel instead and said nothing, and Maya looked at her phone with a small, private expression that she did not share with either of them. The call came on Thursday. The Holloway group was moving forward with Meridian. Logan was at his desk when the email landed, and he read it twice, and then he sat back in his chair and pressed both palms over his face and breathed through it for a moment, because it was large and it was real, and it had his name on it in a way that nothing had had his name on it in a long time. Dennis leaned over from the next desk. "You okay?" "Yeah," Logan said from behind his hands. "You look weird." "I'm fine, Dennis." "Is it the Holloway thing? Because Carl's been up on 42 for 20 minutes and he came back looking—" "It's fine," Logan said, dropping his hands, composing himself. "Everything's fine." It spread through the floor fast the way good news always does, slightly faster than the accurate version. By 2 o'clock, everyone in the creative department knew that Meridian had landed the Holloway contract and that Logan Pierce and Maya Chen had co-led the pitch. By 3 o'clock, the congratulations had started, genuine ones from some people, and the slightly stiff ones from others, the kind that come with a smile that doesn't fully reach. He didn't notice the other kind at first. He was too busy. There were handoff documents to prepare, the project structure to formalize, a team expansion that needed to be planned. He and Maya were in meetings until 6. He barely ate. He texted Mia, "Big news tonight, dinner's on me." She responded with a string of question marks, which was her way of saying she was interested. He took her to the Italian place on 3rd that she liked, the one with the bread that came in a paper bag and the pasta portions that were more than either of them could reasonably finish. He told her about the pitch. She listened with her chin in her hand the way she did when she was actually paying attention and not just being polite. "So you won?" she said. "The company won. I was part of it." She rolled her eyes with the efficiency of someone who has learned this particular modesty well enough to be tired of it. "Dad, you helped win a big thing." "Yeah," he said. "I did." "Good." She picked up a piece of bread. "You should tell more people that." "I'm telling you." "You should tell people who can do something with the information," she said, which was uncomfortably wise for someone whose main current concern was a bean sprout science project and the social dynamics of the 3rd grade playground. He thought about that on the drive home. The rumors started slowly, the way rumors do, not with a declaration but with a tone. A shift in the quality of certain silences when he walked into a room. A conversation that paused half a second too long when he appeared in a doorway. The particular studied neutrality of people who are discussing something and have decided to stop. He noticed it first in week 2 of the new project. A meeting with the extended creative team where two of the senior designers, men who had been with Meridian longer than Logan and had reason to want the Holloway work for themselves, sat with a stillness that wasn't respectful attention, but something with a harder edge. After the meeting, one of them, a man named Reed, stayed behind while the others filed out. "Good pitch," Reed said. He said it in the way that means I have a problem with you and I'm going to be indirect about it for now. "Thanks," Logan said. "Must have helped, having direct access to the CEO throughout." Logan looked at him. Every member of the team had access to the project leadership. "Sure," Reed said. "Of course." He picked up his folder and left. Logan stood in the empty room for a moment. He'd known this was a possibility. Maya had obliquely referenced it 2 weeks into the project when she'd said, with the bluntness she applied to uncomfortable truths, "People are going to pay attention to how much time you spend with Vaughn. Be aware of that." He had been aware of it. Awareness and inoculation were different things. By the end of the week, it had a shape. The version circulating was not dramatic. Nobody was saying anything with a clear accusation attached. It was subtler. Pierce has Vaughn's ear in a way that's unusual. The Holloway win makes sense in that context. It was the kind of thing that left no fingerprints, just a residue. Carl called him in on a Friday morning. Carl had the look of a man who had been tasked with a conversation he would have preferred to avoid. "I'm getting questions," Carl said. He didn't specify from whom. "About what?" Carl looked at his desk. "About the basis for your assignment to the Holloway team. About the level of direct executive involvement in the project. About..." He stopped. "People are wondering whether the assignment and the outcome were entirely merit-based." Logan was very still. "Are you wondering that?" "I'm passing along what's being asked." Carl met his eyes, then looked away. "It's not something I can just ignore. The questions are coming from people with standing to ask them." "What does that mean for me?" "It means I need to be able to say that the process was clean." A pause. "Was it?" "I was assigned by the CEO because she reviewed my work and found it strong," Logan said. He kept his voice even. "That's the full version." Carl nodded slowly. "Okay." He didn't look entirely satisfied. He also didn't look like he believed the gossip, which was something. "Then that's what I'll say." Logan left the office and walked to the stairwell, which was empty, and stood there for 3 minutes with his hand flat on the cold metal railing, working through the particular anger of being good at something and having people locate an explanation that removes your competence from the equation. He went to find Maya. She was in her office with the door half closed, which with Maya meant she was in the middle of something and would prefer not to be interrupted but would tolerate it for the right reason. He pushed the door open. "I know," she said without looking up. "You know." "I've known for a week. I was waiting to see how it landed on you." He sat down. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because there was nothing to do about it yet, and telling you early would just have given you more time to be angry without a constructive outlet." She looked up now. "How angry are you?" "On a scale?" "Sure." 7, he said. "Maybe 8. Reasonable." She set her pen down. "The work is documented. Every decision made on the Holloway pitch has a paper trail, briefs, revisions, meeting notes. Anyone who wants to audit the process will find a process that was clean. That's the truth, and it's also the defense." "The defense shouldn't be necessary." "No," she said. "It shouldn't, but we live in the world as it is." She picked up her pen again. "What are you going to do?" He'd been thinking about it since Carl's office. The answer had come in around the 3rd minute in the stairwell and had not shifted since. "I'm going to ask for a transfer," he said, "to a different project structure. Something without direct executive involvement." Maya looked at him carefully. "That's a significant move." "It's the only one that actually addresses it," he said. "If I stay on Holloway with the same structure, the narrative stays. If I step back and do good work independently, the work becomes the argument." He paused. "It's also the right thing. Sienna shouldn't have to manage political fallout from having done something that was professionally sound. She can manage it herself. She's done harder things." "I know she can. That's not the point." He stood up. "I'm going to talk to her." Maya watched him move to the door. "Logan," he turned. "Make sure you're doing this because it's the right move," she said. Not because you're angry and this feels like the version where you come out with your integrity intact while everyone else deals with the mess. He stood in the doorway. She wasn't wrong to say it. Both things can be true, he said. They can, she agreed. Just be honest about which one is driving. What? He asked Sienna's assistant for 20 minutes that afternoon. He got 15, which was probably accurate. She was at her desk when he came in, which was different from the conference room. More contained, more personal, the city behind her through the window, and papers stacked with the deliberate organization of someone who thinks spatially. She waved him to the chair across from her and finished what she was reading. You're going to tell me about the talk on the floor, she said, setting the paper down. You already know. I heard this morning. Her voice was level. I'm dealing with it. I know you can, he said. That's not why I'm here. He laid it out plainly. The transfer request, the reasoning, the logic of independent work as the only answer that addressed the actual problem instead of just managing the symptoms. He talked for maybe 4 minutes and tried to keep the emotion out of it because the emotion wasn't relevant to whether the reasoning was sound. She listened without interrupting, which was characteristic. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the middle distance in the way she did when she was actually processing something rather than just waiting to respond. You're not wrong, she said finally. I know. The corner of her mouth moved. You could let me be the one to say that first. Sorry. She stood and went to the window. She had her arms crossed, not defensively, but in the way of someone who needs to hold themselves slightly together for a conversation that has become unexpectedly personal. If I approve this transfer, she said, it will look like a concession, like I'm acknowledging there was something to the rumors. Only to people who want it to look that way, he said. Everyone else will see a clean transition with a professional rationale. I'm not leaving Holloway. I'm adjusting the reporting structure. The work stays intact. And you? She turned from the window. What do you get out of this? He hadn't expected the question phrased that way. He held it for a second. The chance to prove it's not true, he said, on my own terms, with my own work. You don't have to prove anything to me. I know. He met her eyes. I need to prove it to myself. Something in the room changed at that, by a small degree. Not dramatically, not in any way that could have been described after the fact with precision, but it changed. She looked at him differently for a moment. Not longer, not with anything that was available for interpretation, just differently. I'll approve it, she said. The formal transfer is effective next Monday. You'll report to the Holloway account director. I'll stay off the project in any direct capacity. She paused. The work was yours, Logan. It was always yours. Anyone with the intelligence to actually look at it will know that. Thank you, he said. He stood to leave. Pierce. He turned for the second time in their history in a doorway. She was looking at her desk, at the stack of papers she'd been reviewing when he came in. She picked up her pen and then set it back down, and it was the same small, restless gesture he'd seen before. The twice-done thing, the tell. This was the right call, she said. Both for the company and for you. A pause that held more than a pause usually held. I wanted you to know I know that. He nodded. He left. He rode the elevator down and walked back to his floor and sat at his desk and looked at the city through the window for a long time. And the anger had gone somewhere, mostly, and what was left in its place was harder to name. Something that wasn't regret exactly, but was in the same territory. The feeling of a correct decision that cost something real. Dennis appeared at the edge of his vision with his afternoon coffee and the expression of someone who senses something has happened but has correctly identified that asking will not be rewarded. Quiet afternoon? Dennis said. Yeah, Logan said. Quiet. He turned back to his screen and opened a new document and started writing something that had nothing to do with Holloway, just to prove that he could. The city went gray and then dark outside his window, and the office emptied around him, and he kept working because working was the thing he knew how to do when everything else was uncertain. And right now everything else was uncertain, and the work was at least real. His phone buzzed at 7:18. Mia. June says dinner is ready. Where are you? He closed his laptop. He put on his jacket. He went home. The transfer went through on Monday without ceremony. which was how Logan had wanted it. His name moved from the executive project roster to the Holloway account team under director placement. His deliverables stayed intact, and the reporting chain shifted 2 levels down. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary organizational adjustment, which was exactly what he needed it to look like. He did not see Sienna for 11 days. He knew she was in the building. He heard her name in meetings, in hallway conversations, in the way people referenced decisions that had come from the 42nd floor. Meridian ran on the fact of her presence even when she wasn't visible, but the direct proximity was gone. No morning coffee in the executive kitchen, no late evening sessions in the conference room with the city going dark outside, no drafts returned at midnight with 2-word assessments that somehow contained everything he needed. The absence was more specific than he'd expected, not painful exactly, just present. A particular shape of quiet where something had been. He worked. He worked with the same consistency he'd always worked, showing up, staying focused, delivering what was due, and occasionally more. The Holloway account director was a woman named Patricia, who was methodical and fair and ran her projects with the steady competence of someone who had seen enough chaos to have developed a genuine appreciation for process. She left him alone when the work was good, which it consistently was, and that was the relationship they had, and it was fine. Maya checked in every few days, not with the frequency of someone monitoring a situation, but with the ease of someone who had decided they were friends now and was acting accordingly. She sent him a research article about consumer psychology in real estate marketing one Tuesday, with no context. He read it, found it genuinely useful, and sent back 3 paragraphs of notes. She responded exactly what I thought. He was realizing how Maya expressed affection, by finding you intellectually useful and letting you know it. The rumors on the creative floor quieted. Not immediately, not all at once, but gradually, the way rumors do when the thing they were feeding on stops being visible, and time moves forward with its habitual indifference to last month's gossip. Reed stopped performing neutrality when Logan walked by and went back to regular mild professional distance, which was an improvement. Carl seemed relieved in a way he was too careful to show openly. Logan told himself it was working. Most days he believed it. Mia's cast came off in late January at a follow-up appointment that she treated as a minor bureaucratic inconvenience rather than the milestone her teacher had described it as. She wiggled her fingers on the drive home, assessing their operational status with the seriousness of a mechanic testing a repaired engine. "It feels weird," she said. "That's normal. It'll feel normal in a few days." "How do you know?" "I broke my wrist when I was 12. Same thing." She looked at him. "You never told me that." "You never asked." She considered this with her particular evaluating expression. "What happened?" "I was trying to jump a bike ramp I had no business jumping." "Did you make it?" "No." She nodded slowly with something that was not quite sympathy, but was in the vicinity of it. "That's kind of disappointing." "Yeah," he said. "It was." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Sienna hasn't been to the office on Saturdays lately." He kept his eyes on the road. "How do you know that?" "I don't. I'm just saying she hasn't come to say hi." "We're not working on the same project anymore," Logan said. "I moved to a different team." "Did something happen?" "It's just how work works sometimes. Projects change, structures change. Mia did not respond to this immediately, which meant she was processing it in the background the way she processed most things she wasn't satisfied with. She looked out the window. "I like talking to her," she said, in a tone that was not quite complaint, not quite question. "I know. Captain misses her too." Captain the stuffed dog lived on Mia's bed in a position of honor beside the pillow. Logan had learned not to comment on this. "Dogs are loyal," Logan said. Mia looked at him with the expression of someone who recognizes a deflection and is choosing not to call it out. "Okay," she said, and looked back out the window, and the subject closed but did not disappear. He ran into Sienna at the end of February. Not in the building, outside it, on the street, 6 blocks south of the office, in the specific randomness of a city that occasionally puts people in each other's paths without consulting anyone. He was coming out of a sandwich place with lunch he'd bought to eat at his desk because he had a 2:30 he needed to prep for. She was walking north with her coat collar up against the wind and her phone to her ear, finishing a call. She ended the call as she reached him. They both stopped on the sidewalk with the involuntary quality of two people whose bodies have made a decision their minds are still catching up to. "Hey," Logan said. "Hey." She had a slight color in her face from the cold that made her look less like a CEO and more like a person. "Lunch?" He held up the paper bag. "Desk lunch." "Same." She had a coffee in her other hand that she'd apparently picked up from somewhere. She looked at him with the careful assessing quality she'd never entirely lost, but something underneath it was slightly different, less controlled maybe, or more tired. It was hard to say. "How's the Holloway work going?" "Well, Patricia runs a clean operation." "She does?" A pause. The wind moved between them. "Your Q4 analysis was good. Patricia forwarded it up." "I didn't know that." "She wouldn't have told you. She doesn't give praise directly. She just moves the work upward." Sienna turned her coffee cup in her hand. "It was good work." "Thank you," he said, and meant it simply, without the complicated surrounding material that thank you had accumulated between them over the past months. She nodded. The pause stretched in a way that was not uncomfortable but had a weight to it. "How's Mia?" she asked. "Cass came off. She's fine. He stopped, decided to just say it. "She mentioned you, actually, a few weeks ago." Sienna looked at him steadily. "What did she say?" "That she liked talking to you, that you talked to her like a person." He paused. "She's right, by the way. A lot of adults don't." Something moved in Sienna's expression that she didn't fully manage, that came and went faster than she'd probably have preferred. "I didn't have many adults like that when I was her age," she said. "It was offered simply, without bid for sympathy. Just a fact." "I know," he said. "Maya told me a little. About growing up." She looked mildly surprised, not offended. "Maya talks more than she appears to. Only about things she thinks are important." A beat. Then, very quietly, "How are you?" The question, the way she asked it, not politely, not as transition, landed somewhere he wasn't braced for. He looked at the sidewalk for a second, then back at her. "I'm okay," he said. "Better than a few weeks ago. I needed the space to just do the work, without the politics around it. I think it was right." "It was right," she said. "I've thought about it a lot. I keep arriving at the same conclusion." "Me too." "That doesn't mean I didn't—" She stopped. The collar of her coat shifted in the wind and she pulled it back up. "It doesn't mean it was easy," she finished, which was not quite what she'd started to say, and they both knew it, and neither of them pushed it further. "No," Logan said. "It wasn't easy." They stood on the sidewalk in the February cold, and the city moved around them, and the pause between them was the kind that exists when two people are holding the same thought from opposite sides, and neither has decided what to do with it yet. "I should get back," she said. "Yeah, me too." She started to move, then turned back just slightly. "Tell Mia—" She stopped, almost edited it, then didn't. "Tell her Captain was a good choice." He looked at her. "She named the dog Captain." "I know, it was a good choice." She looked at him for another second. Just a second, but it had edges. "Take care of yourself, Logan." "You too," he said. She walked north. He stood on the sidewalk with his paper bag and his prep work and the 2:30 meeting waiting for him, and watched her go for longer than he'd have admitted to anyone, and then turned south and walked back to the office. He ate at his desk. The sandwich was unremarkable. The prep work was thorough. The meeting went fine. He thought about the way she'd said it doesn't mean it was easy, and the way her voice had carried something underneath the control, something that hadn't been available the first time he'd sat across from her in the executive conference room, and she'd told him the Harlow campaign was a data point, not a compliment. He thought about the street and the cold and the fact that she'd asked, "How are you?" and waited for the actual answer. He didn't do anything with any of that, but he held it carefully, the way you hold something you haven't decided what to do with yet. It was Tyler who forced the conversation, inadvertently, with the complete lack of guile that was either his best or worst quality, depending on the week. He came over for dinner in March, ostensibly to help Logan fix a stuck window in the second bedroom that had been stuck since November, actually to eat food and sit on the couch. The window repair took 12 minutes. The sitting on the couch took considerably longer. Mia was in her room doing homework. Tyler was on his second bowl of pasta and operating at the conversational frequency he reached after about 40 minutes in any comfortable environment, which was approximately no filter. "Can I ask you something?" Tyler said. "You're going to regardless," Logan said. "The CEO of your company, Sienna something." Logan set his fork down. "How do you know about that?" "You mentioned her like 4 times over the past 2 months without realizing you were doing it." Tyler twirled his fork. "I looked her up." "Why?" "Because I was curious about the person my brother mentions 4 times without realizing he's doing it." He looked up. "She seems serious." "She is serious." "You like her?" Tyler, "Not like an opinion, like a fact." Tyler ate a bite, untroubled by Logan's expression. "It's okay. You're allowed." "She's my CEO." "She's not your direct supervisor anymore. You said that." "She's still the CEO of the company I work for." "Okay," Tyler shrugged. "Is that actually the problem, or is the problem that you're scared?" Logan picked his fork back up. "I'm not having this conversation." "You're not scared of the CEO thing," Tyler said, with the infuriating accuracy of someone who had watched Logan operate for 32 years. "You're scared of the part where you want something and it doesn't work out, because you've had that." The kitchen was quiet except for Mia's music coming faintly from her room. "We've been through a lot professionally," Logan said carefully. It was already complicated. I made decisions that put distance between us for good reasons. You can't just undo that because the reasons have run their course." "Why not?" "Because it's not that simple." "I know it's not simple," Tyler said. "I'm asking why not anyway." Logan looked at his plate. "Because what if she doesn't? What if I'm the only one who—" "You're not," Tyler said. "You don't know that." "I know you," Tyler said. "And I know that the times you've mentioned her, you don't sound like someone talking about their boss." He set his bowl down. "I'm not saying blow up your career for a feeling. I'm saying don't keep doing the thing where you protect yourself so thoroughly that nothing actually gets to reach you." The music from Mia's room had changed to something slower. Logan could hear her singing along softly, partially, the way she sang when she thought nobody was listening. "She talked to Mia like she was a person," Logan said. "Not as an argument, just something that needed to be said out loud." "Yeah," Tyler said. "I know, you told me." He picked his bowl back up. "That matters to you. Obviously it matters to you. The question is what you're going to do about it." Logan said nothing. Tyler ate. The conversation moved to other things, lighter things, and Logan let it move, and the topic didn't come back up. But he lay awake that night longer than usual, and he was honest with himself in the specific way that 2 in the morning sometimes demands. And he acknowledged that the problem wasn't the CEO thing, and it wasn't the professional complication, and it wasn't even the fear of reaching for something and not having it reach back. The problem was simpler and harder than all of that. The problem was that Sienna Vaughn had become important to him in a way that had nothing to do with work, and he had no clear map for what to do with that. And the absence of a clear map was exactly the kind of uncertainty he'd spent several years getting very good at avoiding. Mia found him at the kitchen table the next morning at 6:45, which was earlier than her usual time, and sat across from him with the directness she applied to most things she'd decided needed addressing. "Can I say something?" she said. "Sure." "I think you should call Sienna." Logan looked at his coffee. "Good morning to you too." "I heard you and Uncle Tyler talking," she said, not apologetically, just factually. "Mia?" "I wasn't trying to listen. My door was open." She folded her hands on the table, a gesture that was so precisely adult it caught him off guard. "I know it's complicated. You explained some of it. But I think you're using the complicated part as a reason not to do the thing you actually want to do." He looked at her, 8 years old, with her mother's dark hair and her own particular stubborn clarity. "When did you get this wise?" he said. "I've been watching you for 8 years," she said. "I've learned stuff." He laughed, which surprised both of them. "She misses you too," Mia said. I don't know her that well, but I could tell. When she asked about you at the hospital, when she talked about the project." She paused. "People who don't care don't ask questions like that." "You're 8. I know what people look like when they're pretending not to care about something," she said, and the way she said it, with the very specific, unflinching knowledge of a child who has watched an adult do exactly that and learned to recognize the shape of it, landed somewhere that had nothing to do with Sienna and everything to do with every morning Logan had spent being fine in front of his daughter because he'd believed that was what she needed. He set his coffee down. He looked at his daughter across the kitchen table in the early morning light. "I'm sorry," he said, If the fine thing has ever felt like distance." She looked at him. "It doesn't feel like distance," she said. "It feels like you working very hard." She unfolded her hands. "I just think you're allowed to not work so hard sometimes." He reached over and put his hand over hers on the table. She turned hers over and held it, unselfconsciously, the way she used to when she was small and the world was large, and he was the fixed point. "Okay," he said. "I'll think about it." "Okay," she said, and stood up and went to get her cereal, and the conversation was done in the complete way that Mia's conversations were done. No hanging threads, no performance of having said something important. Just said and finished and put somewhere useful. He thought about it. He thought about it all the way through February becoming March, and the Holloway work producing results that were measurable and documented, and his, indisputably his. He thought about it when Patricia sent his campaign analysis to the 42nd floor, and the 42nd floor sent back a formal commendation that landed in his personnel file with no personal note attached and no need for one. He thought about it when he passed Sienna in the lobby one afternoon, and they exchanged the brief professional acknowledgement of two people who knew each other well and were being careful. And he watched her walk to the elevator and recognized the careful as the same species of it that he was practicing, both of them holding something at a managed distance because managed distance was what they'd agreed on, without ever quite agreeing to it. He called her on a Thursday night in the middle of March, not from the office. From his car, parked outside the apartment building, with the engine off and the city quiet around him and Mia safe upstairs with her homework and Captain and the slow Tuesday night rhythm of their life. She picked up on the third ring, Logan. Not surprised, or if surprised, not showing it. "Hi." He had not prepared a speech. He had decided consciously not to prepare a speech because he'd done enough protecting of ideas before he trusted them. "I was wondering if you wanted to have coffee. Not a work thing, just coffee." Silence on the line. Not long. Maybe 4 seconds. "Okay," she said. "Saturday morning?" "Saturday morning works," she said. A pause. "There's a place on Carlisle Street, Forager. Good coffee and nobody I know goes there." "Forager on Carlisle," he said. 10? 10, she said. Another pause, shorter this time, with a different quality. Lighter, maybe. Less guarded. "How's Mia?" she asked. "She told me to call you," he said honestly. A beat. Then something happened in her voice that he'd heard maybe twice before. Not quite a laugh, but the structure of one. The shape of something close to warm and entirely unperformed. "Smart kid," she said. "The smartest," he said. "I'll see you Saturday." He sat in the car for another minute after they hung up, hands resting on his thighs, looking at nothing in particular. The city made its ordinary sounds. Upstairs, his daughter was probably done with her homework and had moved on to drawing in her notebook, or reading or talking to Captain about the events of the day with the seriousness she brought to those private conversations. He was not sure what Saturday would be. He was not sure what came after Saturday, or how any of it would work in the actual complicated world where she ran the company and he worked there, and neither of them was a simple person with a simple life. He had no map. The absence of a map was real. But he'd spent enough time standing still inside the absence of certainty that he'd confused caution with living, and his 8-year-old daughter had sat across from him at the kitchen table in the early morning and told him he was allowed to not work so hard. And at some point, the only honest response to that was to try. He got out of the car. He went upstairs. Mia was at the kitchen table with her notebook, drawing something he couldn't identify from the doorway. "Well?" she said without looking up. "Saturday," he said. She nodded once with the satisfaction of someone whose advice has been taken. She did not say "I told you so." She was better than that. "Dinner's in the oven," she said, "worry 40 minutes. "Since when do you put dinner in the oven?" "Since June showed me how to set the timer," she said. "It's not complicated." He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at his daughter and the notebook and the small, ordered world of their apartment and thought about the way things change. Not all at once, not cleanly, but by accumulation, small corrections to a course that gets you somewhere you couldn't have mapped from the beginning. "Thank you," he said. To her, to the room, to the specific weight of the moment. Mia looked up. "The oven," she said. 40 minutes. He laughed and went to set the table. Forger on Carlisle Street was exactly the kind of place that existed in cities without advertising itself. Narrow, warm, the kind of coffee shop that had earned its regulars through consistency rather than aesthetic. The tables were small and slightly mismatched, and the espresso machine was loud in the way of equipment that had been working hard for years and intended to keep doing so. Logan arrived at 9:58 and got a table by the window, which he immediately second-guessed because windows in coffee shops felt like a choice that implied something, and then decided he was being ridiculous and sat down anyway. Sienna came in at 10:03. She was in jeans and a dark green sweater, and her hair was down, which he had seen exactly once before. The Friday night outside marquee, which felt like it had happened to a different version of both of them. Without the blazer, without the executive floor context, without the project deadline pressing down on the room, she looked like a person who was slightly unsure what to do with her hands. She scanned the room, found him, and crossed to the table without the particular performance of casualness that people put on when they're trying to seem relaxed. She sat down. They looked at each other for a moment. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. The server came. They ordered. The transaction of it gave both of them approximately 90 seconds of neutral ground, and when it was done, they were back to sitting across from each other in a coffee shop on a Saturday morning with no agenda, no project timeline, no professional scaffolding to hang the conversation on. "This is strange," Sienna said. "Yeah," he said. "A little." "I'm not good at this part," she said. Not apologetically, just as information. "What part?" She made a small gesture with her hand that seemed to indicate the table, the coffee shop, the Saturday, all of it. "The part where there's no objective, where you're just supposed to talk. We've talked plenty. About work. About your management philosophy and my creative instincts and whether I was protecting my ideas instead of trusting them," he said. "That's not nothing." The corner of her mouth moved. "That's still work adjacent." "Okay. What do you want to talk about that isn't work adjacent?" She looked at her coffee cup when it arrived and wrapped both hands around it in the way she did in early mornings, and he recognized the gesture with a quiet specificity that caught him slightly off guard. The accumulation of small knowledge that builds without your deciding to build it. "Tell me something about yourself that has nothing to do with Meridian," she said. He thought about it honestly. "I broke my wrist when I was 12 trying to jump a bike ramp I had no business jumping." She looked at him. "That's the thing?" "I didn't make it either. I did not clear the ramp." He paused. "I tried it again 2 weeks later when the cast came off. Didn't make it then either." "Did you ever make it?" "Eventually, third attempt. But I'd already decided to quit at that point, so there was nobody around to see it." He shrugged. "That's kind of a recurring theme, actually. I do the thing right when I've stopped performing the doing of it." She was quiet for a moment, in the listening way she had, not filling the silence, but actually using it. "My turn?" she said. "Sure." "I burned an entire apartment kitchen when I was 23, she said. "Not badly. No permanent damage. The fire department came, but it was mostly smoke. I was trying to make pasta." She looked at her cup. "I hadn't cooked for myself much before that. I'd been in school or living on campus, or there was always a dining hall or takeout. I didn't realize you had to stay in the room. You left the stove on." "I left the stove on and went to answer an email," she said, which is extremely on brand in retrospect. He laughed. She laughed too, a real one, brief and a little reluctant, like laughter was something she gave out in limited quantities and had decided he was worth a portion of. "Do you cook now?" he asked. I make three things adequately. Everything else is either takeout or a question I don't ask myself. Mia would say that's a solvable problem. Is she offering to teach me? She might. She put dinner in the oven by herself last week, set the timer and everything. She's very proud of it. Sienna smiled at that, a full one, and it changed her face in the way that full smiles change faces when they're not the usual expression. Opening it up, making visible something that was always there but got kept behind the professional register most of the time. She's extraordinary, Sienna said, quietly, and meaning it. I know, he said. Then, because it felt like the honest version, she told me to call you. You know that. You told me. I wanted to say, it wasn't just because she told me to. It was because she said something that I should have been saying to myself. And she's 8 years old, and she knew it before I did, which is either a testament to her or a comment on my self-awareness. Sienna looked at him steadily. What did she say? He held it for a second. That I'm allowed to not work so hard sometimes, he said. That I use the complicated parts as reasons not to do the thing I actually want to do. The coffee shop was warm, and the noise of the espresso machine came and went, and the Saturday moved outside the window at its ordinary pace. Sienna kept her hands around her cup and looked at him with the directness that was native to her, but stripped of the professional layer that usually accompanied it, and he could see her deciding something. I've been doing the same thing, she said, for longer than you have. I know. No. I mean, she stopped, started differently. When I was moving around as a kid, the thing that made sense to hold on to was the thing that was just mine. Work. Performance. The outcome you can control if you put enough into it. People were variable. Cities were temporary. But if you were good enough at the thing in front of you, that held. Yeah, he said, because he understood it. Not the same shape as his own version, but the same instinct. Protect the thing you can control. Manage down the exposure to everything you can't. I'm 30 years old and I run a $40 million company, she said. And Mia asked me how I learned to draw trees, and I sat in a hospital chair for 40 minutes. And it was the most She stopped, looked at the table. It was the most I'd felt like a person in a long time. He didn't say anything, because the moment didn't need it. This is the part I'm not good at, she said again, quieter. Saying the real thing instead of the managed version. You're doing it right now. It's uncomfortable. Yeah, he said. I know. It doesn't entirely stop being uncomfortable. Does it get easier? He thought about that honestly. It gets more familiar, he said. That's not the same as easier, but familiar is enough to work with. She nodded slowly, looking at him in a way that had no professional purpose and made no attempt to pretend otherwise. I don't know what this looks like, she said. You work at Meridian. I run Meridian. There's already a version of this story that people told about us, and it wasn't accurate, but it existed. I know. I'm not good at the kind of exposure that comes with... She gestured between them. I know that too. So what do we do with all of that? He looked at her across the small mismatched table in the coffee shop on Carlisle Street on a Saturday morning in March, with the city going about its indifferent and ordinary business outside the window. He thought about everything that had led to this table, the Friday night sidewalk and the folded jacket and the first conference room meeting and the long evenings and the hospital chair and the 11 days of absence that had had a specific shape and the street in February with both of them being careful. We do it slowly, he said, with honesty. We figure out the boundaries that are real versus the ones we've built out of habit, and we respect the real ones and we question the others. He paused. We don't perform it. We don't pretend it's simpler than it is, and we don't use the complicated parts to avoid the actual thing. She was quiet. That's what I've got, he said. It's not a project framework. No, she said. Something in her voice had changed, less managed, more present. But it's better than a project framework. High praise. It is actually, she said, and meant it. They stayed for another hour and a half. They talked about her childhood in her grandparents' house, the particular loneliness of it, and the particular strength it had also built. He told her about the years after Renata left, The specific education of learning to be a parent in the absence of the person you'd assumed would be doing half of it. They talked about the Holloway campaign and about Maya, whom Sienna described as one of the most tactically intelligent people she'd ever worked with, and also slightly terrifying, which Logan confirmed. They ordered a second round. The coffee shop filled and thinned around them, and they didn't notice. When they left, it was past noon, and the street was bright with the particular thin brightness of early spring that promises more than it delivers, but is welcome anyway. They stood on the sidewalk. "Mia has her science presentation next Friday," Logan said. "It's a school thing. It's not a pitch for anything. I just thought I'd like to come," Sienna said. "If that's okay, I'll check with Mia." "Obviously," he nodded. She put her hands in her coat pockets. They stood there for a moment in the uncomplicated way of two people who have said the real things and are now standing in the aftermath of that, which is not dramatic but is solid. "Saturday was a good idea," she said. "My 8-year-old's idea." "Your 8-year-old is better at this than either of us," she said. He walked home. It was 30 minutes on foot, and he took it all the long way through the park, because he wanted the time and the air and the specific quiet of a decision that has been made and is now simply being carried forward. The months that followed were not a montage. They were actual months, with actual difficulty, and anybody who tells you that two complicated people choosing each other is mostly romantic momentum has either never done it or is selling something. The first time Logan and Sienna were seen together outside a professional context, at a restaurant in April, just dinner, nothing announced, it registered on the Meridian social graph within 48 hours. Not loudly, there was no confrontation, no board intervention, no dramatic reckoning. But it was known, and being known meant it had to be managed, and managing it meant conversations that were uncomfortable and necessary, and which they had without pretending they didn't need to happen. Sienna disclosed the relationship to the board in May. It was a formal process, handled correctly, with an updated conflict of interest framework that confirmed Logan's reporting structure was entirely separate from her oversight, and had been since December. It was the kind of thing that needed to happen, and was considerably less terrible than either of them had imagined, which Logan noted was often the case with things you'd been dreading. The anticipation was usually worse than the event. Reed made one more comment in June, something indirect and sharp-edged in the men's room at a company event that Logan heard because Reed hadn't checked whether the stall was occupied. Logan didn't respond to it. He filed it away. He let the work answer it because the work was by then answering everything, quietly and consistently, and without anyone being able to argue with the results. Patricia told him in July that he was being considered for a senior creative director position, separate from Holloway, built on the body of work he'd produced independently over the previous 8 months. She told him in the flat, factual way she told people things, with no performance attached, and he thanked her in the same register and went back to his desk and sat with it for a few minutes in the good way. He texted Maya. "Patricia talked to me." Maya responded, "I know. About time." He texted Sienna. "Apparently I'm being considered for senior creative director." Sienna responded, "I heard. You should take it." He texted back. "It wasn't an offer yet." Her response came a minute later. "It will be. You should take it." He smiled at his phone and put it in his pocket and went back to work. Mia's science fair presentation in the spring had gone well. She'd placed second, which she was satisfied with in the moderate way of someone who had wanted first, but had genuinely evaluated the competition and concluded second was an accurate reflection of comparative merit. Jalen had placed third, which she reported with a neutrality that Logan recognized as effortful. Sienna had come. She'd sat in the school gymnasium on a folding chair beside Logan and watched Mia explain her bean sprout research to a rotating audience of parents and judges with the focused patience of someone who was genuinely interested, not performing interest. When Mia finished her presentation and came to find them, she walked directly to Sienna first and held up her second-place ribbon. "I got robbed," Mia said. "You got second," Sienna said. "What beat you?" "A solar-powered model of the water cycle." "It was good," she admitted grudgingly. "But mine was more original." "Originality doesn't always win. That's worth knowing early." Mia considered this. "That's a depressing lesson." It's a useful one, Sienna said. The next version of your project should be both original and technically cleaner. Then it wins. Mia looked at her with the expression of someone who has received useful information but isn't ready to concede the point immediately. Maybe, she said. Then, because she was Mia, I'm glad you came. I'm glad I came too, Sienna said. On the drive home, Mia held her second-place ribbon in her lap and was quiet for most of it. Then a few blocks from the apartment. She's going to be around more, right, Sienna? Yeah, Logan said. She is. Mia nodded once with the deliberate satisfaction of someone who had identified a problem months ago, proposed a solution, and is now watching the solution function as predicted. She did not say anything further. She did not need to. Captain the stuffed dog had been moved to the living room bookshelf by this point, in a position of permanent honorary residence, ears slightly lopsided, watching the apartment with the loyal indifference of a dog who has been given a mission and takes it seriously. By September, Sienna had a drawer at Logan's apartment. It had started practically. She stayed over on Saturdays with increasing regularity, and a drawer was a more dignified solution than a bag by the door, and had expanded slowly and without ceremony into a quiet fact of the household. Some of her things were there. The apartment had adjusted around them without drama. Mia had strong opinions about where things went. The green mug should be on the left side, she told Sienna on a Sunday morning in October when Sienna was reorganizing the cabinet after washing dishes. That's where it fits. The tall ones go on the right. That seems arbitrary, Sienna said. It's not arbitrary, Mia said, with the patience of someone explaining something obvious. The left side is for everyday mugs. The right side is for special occasion mugs. The green one is your everyday mug. Sienna looked at the cabinet, then at Mia. I have an assigned mug. You've been using it for 3 months, Mia said. It's your mug. Logan, at the kitchen table with the newspaper and coffee he was not actually reading, watched Sienna process this. The fact that an 8-year-old had quietly incorporated her into the organizational logic of the household with the matter-of-fact thoroughness of someone who had simply decided it was true. Sienna put the green mug on the left side of the cabinet. She didn't make a thing of it. Okay, she said. Thank you, Mia said, and went back to her homework. Logan caught Sienna's eye across the kitchen. She looked at him with an expression he had come to know. Not soft, not hard, not the CEO register, and not its opposite, just present. Here. In the kitchen on a Sunday morning with the green mug on the left side of the cabinet and a kid at the table doing homework. He held it for a second. This ordinary, specific, improbable thing. She looked away first, back at the dishes, and that was fine too. Let's see. The Holloway campaign's first-year results came in November. They exceeded the projections significantly, not by the kind of margin that makes a press release, but by the kind that makes the board look at each other and then look at the CEO with something shifting in the room. Meridian's revenue model changed. The things Logan had written about in the brief, the shift in targeting, the repositioning of emotional language, the where ordinary days become the ones you keep framework, had worked in the measurable world. Numbers, renewals, market data. Patricia took him to lunch to discuss the senior creative director offer formally. It had come through in October and he'd accepted it in the way he made most decisions, carefully and then completely. At lunch she was warmer than usual, which for Patricia meant she made one joke and waited to see if he laughed. He laughed. She nodded as though this had confirmed something. You did good work here, she said. The right way. I want you to know I noticed. Thank you, he said. That matters. It should, she said. The right way is harder and takes longer, and most people eventually stop doing it. She picked up her water glass. Don't stop doing it. I don't intend to, he said. Nobody intends to, she said. Do it anyway. He thought about that for a long time afterward, not in the abstract way of thinking about advice, but in the specific and personal way, about the past year, the choices made and the ones avoided, the long, careful arc of proving something that had never needed to be proven to the one person whose assessment actually mattered, which was himself. Because that was the real story underneath the professional story. Not the rumors or the board disclosure or the transfer or the Holloway results or the promotion. The real story was about a man who had been competent and careful and present for years and had still needed to stand inside the proof of his own worth before he could stop managing the distance between himself and the things he actually wanted. That was the hard thing, not the politics or the optics or the complications. The hard thing was always the same hard thing, the gap between what you know about yourself and what you allow yourself to believe. The night Sienna moved the last of the things she'd been distributing quietly across Logan's apartment over the course of 8 months, books and a lamp and the small framed photograph of her grandparents' house that she'd carried through every city and every apartment she'd ever lived in. Mia was in bed and the apartment was quiet, and Logan was helping her find room on the bookshelf for the frame. "Where do you want it?" he asked. She looked at the shelf. Captain the dog was at one end, presiding. Books were stacked and loose and mixed with Mia's overflow. The framed photograph was small, a wood-shingled house on a street he didn't recognize, a garden that had seen better decades, afternoon light. "I don't know," she said. "Somewhere it can see the room." He cleared a space between a stack of novels and one of Mia's drawings that had been framed because Mia had requested it framed, and he set the photograph there, angled slightly so it faced the room. Sienna looked at it. She nodded once. "It's the house in Portland, Maine," she said. "My grandparents. They've both been gone a while now, but I've carried this everywhere I've lived." She paused. "I've never had it on a shelf where it could see a room. I've always put it where it wouldn't bother anyone." He looked at her. "I know how that sounds," she said. "It sounds like something that shouldn't be true anymore," he said. She looked at him for a moment with the particular directness that was the most Sienna thing about her. No deflection, no management of the moment, just present. "No," she said, "it shouldn't." She did not cry. She was not built for crying in front of people, probably not built for it privately either, and he did not need her to. He just stood beside her in front of the bookshelf in the apartment that was now also hers and let the moment be what it was, quiet and specific and real. She leaned against him, not dramatically, not with performance, just leaned her shoulder against his arm the way people lean when they are tired and have stopped pretending not to be. He didn't move. He let her lean. They stood there for a minute. The apartment was quiet. Captain watched from his end of the shelf with his lopsided ear. "She's going to reorganize this shelf tomorrow," Sienna said. "Definitely," he said. "She'll have a system." "An extremely logical one that makes no sense to anyone else," he agreed. Sienna exhaled, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, something in between. The kind of breath that comes out of you when you've been holding something for a long time and have decided to put it down. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. Mata. What nobody tells you about the life you build after the hard years is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with clarity or resolution or the particular relief you'd imagined. It accumulates. A green mug on the left side of a cabinet, a photograph that can see the room, a second-place ribbon on the kitchen counter that nobody has moved because moving it would mean the moment is over and nobody wants the moment to be over. A child at the table doing homework while 2 adults do the dishes without being asked which one goes next, because they've done this enough times now to know. Logan Pierce was 33 years old. He had a daughter who was 9 in December and who had strong opinions about cabinet organization and mug placement and the methodology of bean sprout experiments, and who had known before he did that his instinct to stay careful and protected was costing him something real. He had a job he was good at, a title he'd earned without anyone being able to argue with the process, and a team that trusted him because he told them the truth, even when the truth wasn't encouraging. He had a woman in his life who was not easy, and did not pretend to be easy, and who was teaching herself, slowly, by increments, the way she did everything, to let the ordinary moments of a shared life register as what they were, which was not nothing. Sienna Vaughn was 31 years old. She ran a company that had spent the past year exceeding its own expectations, and she did it with the confidence she'd always had, and a slightly different posture. Less defended, not weaker, the difference between a wall and a foundation. She sat in gymnasium chairs at school science fairs. She had a drawer. She knew which mug was hers. She did not have her life figured out. She had never had it figured out, despite the persistent impression she gave of someone who did. She was still more comfortable with a project brief than with an unstructured Saturday. She still sometimes delivered the managed version of the real thing. She was still learning, genuinely, imperfectly, at the pace that real learning happens, to say the actual thing she meant instead of the organized version. That was the truth of it. Not the clean version, not the one where the right choice produces a clear outcome, and the people who deserved recognition received it in proportion to what they gave. Real life did not maintain that kind of bookkeeping. Real life gave you a Friday night sidewalk and an accidental moment and the choice of what you were going to do with the fallout, and most of the meaning was in what you chose. Logan had chosen to show up, again and again, on the 42nd floor when he expected to be fired, in the hospital when Mia was scared, in the conference room when the work needed to be real and not protected, at Sienna's door when his instinct was to manage the distance and his daughter's voice was in his head telling him he was allowed to stop working so hard. Sienna had chosen to stay. A harder choice in some ways, for someone whose version of protection was never needing to stay. She had chosen the hospital chair and the science fair and the drawer and the green mug on the left side and the photograph that could see the room. They had both made those choices imperfectly, inconsistently, with residual fear and wrong moves along the way. The point was not that they'd made them without flinching. The point was that they'd made them. In December, on a Saturday morning when Mia was visiting Renata in Portland, the Portland with the ceramic studio, and the version of her mother that was content and separate and fine, the version Mia had learned to understand without resentment because Logan had never poisoned it, because some things you protect even when they cost you something. Logan and Sienna had the apartment entirely to themselves for the first time. It was strange in the particular way that familiar spaces are strange when their most reliable presence is temporarily absent. The apartment felt larger and quieter and slightly uncertain of what to do with itself. They made breakfast. Sienna burned the toast, which she accepted without comment and replaced with a second attempt that was better. Logan overcooked the eggs, and she pointed this out without cruelty, and he acknowledged it and ate them anyway, because they were fine. They ate at the kitchen table and read different sections of the same newspaper and did not talk very much. And it was the most domestic and ordinary thing either of them had experienced in a long time, and neither of them said that out loud because saying it out loud would have made it self-conscious, and it was better without the weight of being observed. After breakfast, Sienna looked out the window at the December street. "It's snowing," she said. "A little," he said. "Mia's going to be upset she missed it." "She'll be home tomorrow. It'll still be here." Sienna looked at the street for another moment. The snow was light, the hesitant kind that hasn't committed to anything yet. The kind that might amount to something or might not, depending on what the day decided. "I keep waiting for the part where this stops feeling precarious," she said. Quietly, not as complaint, just as honest report. He looked at her across the table. "Does it feel precarious right now?" She thought about it. "No," she said. "Right now it feels—" She searched for the word, which was unusual for her. "Like exactly what it is." "That's not a bad thing," he said. "No," she said. "It's not." She looked at him. "It's actually kind of the point." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, the same way he'd done with Mia at the kitchen table in the early morning when she'd told him he was allowed to stop working so hard. Sienna turned her hand over and held it, and didn't look away. Outside, the snow continued its non-committal descent, settling on the street in the gentle, accumulating way that things settle when they've finally found the right surface. Nothing dramatic, nothing announced, just the ordinary, specific, stubborn fact of two people choosing to be present in the same room, on the same morning, in the same life. That was all. That was everything. There are things people say about love, about family, about the moments that change the direction of a life, that they arrive clearly, that you know them when they come, that the right door announces itself. But most doors don't announce themselves. Most of the things that matter happen sideways, in the margins of the life you were already living. A side door and a cold sidewalk. A jacket handed backward in the dark. A child with a notebook and a question about trees. An 8-year-old who sat across a kitchen table and told her father the truest thing, that he was allowed to want more than the version of things he'd decided was safe enough to keep. You spend years protecting yourself and calling it wisdom, and sometimes it is wisdom, and sometimes it's just fear with a better vocabulary. The difference is worth knowing. The difference is exactly worth knowing. Logan Pierce learned it at 32 on a Friday night outside a nightclub without knowing that's what he was learning. He learned it again every time he chose the harder version of honesty over the comfortable management of distance. He is still learning it, the way everyone is always still learning the things that actually count. Sienna Vaughn learned it in increments, the way she learned most things. Through evidence, through exposure, through the stubborn accumulation of mornings in a kitchen that was not hers and then was. She learned it from a 9-year-old who told her a green mug belonged on the left side of the cabinet because it was her everyday mug now, which meant she was everyday here, which meant this was home, which meant she could put down the photograph where it could see the room, which meant she could stay.